Good morning, Year 10, and welcome to your third lesson on A Christmas Carol. So today's big question is, who is Marley and why does he visit Scrooge? Of course, this event transpires in stave 1, so we are still in the first part of the novella. This resource will coincide with the third lesson material posted on Edulink on Tuesday. Okay, on the second Tuesday in this series. And remember that this work that follows that Mr. Paul is setting for us will be due Friday and should be emailed to me or attached on our class Google Classrooms. Otherwise, I probably won't see it. I'm keeping a tracker of our work, and Mr. Paul is doing the same for his class. Okay, we need to see proof. So our lesson intentions today are to give you the goods to complete your third lesson due Friday, and thus to explore Marley's characterization and Dickens' intentions through this character, the first of the 4 ghosts that Scrooge encounters. So, what do we know so far? Because although we haven't met him yet, at least in the part of my presentation here, we certainly have been given some information prior to this moment. Now, I want to draw your attention to a quotation from when the charitable fellows visit Scrooge and attempt to arouse a charitable donation from him. Of course, he responds with the harsh negation when asked how much he will donate with: nothing. Before they receive the negation, nothing, one of the charitable workers states, "We have no doubt his liberality is well represented by his surviving partner." So what the charitable worker is saying there is that we're sure that even though Marley has now passed on, okay, has since been dead, we have no doubt that you, his surviving partner, okay, surviving business partner, you will also represent, I'm sure, just how liberal, just how generous he was when he was alive. Now, clearly this charitable worker never met Marley, but the limited omniscient narrative perspective knows more when they say, "It certainly was, for they had been 2 kindred spirits." Now, what the limited omniscient narrator is saying here, Year 10, very sarcastically, very satirically, with a massive dollop of irony, is that sure, Scrooge is just as generous as Marley, if you mean both of them were equally not generous. Okay, if you describe people as kindred spirits, you're suggesting that they share similar attitudes or ideas. So what the narrator is stating there is that Scrooge and Marley are kindred spirits. They both share that really miserly attitude, that egocentric, self-centered fixation on business. Okay, so what we learned before even Marley's ghost's visitation is that in all likelihood Marley was very similar to Scrooge in his lifetime. Okay, so everything we learnt about Scrooge in the first lesson in this series, you could be fairly confident in using the same adjectives for Marley in his lifetime. When we meet his ghost, there are some clear differences in his attitudes. Okay, he's clearly learnt something in the afterlife. Okay, so let's go ahead. So the first thing, let's just move chronologically, is that when Marley arrives, he first arrives, you can see from my movie edition down the bottom here, in the form of a door knocker, or at least he morphs the door knocker into his visage, into his image. And when Scrooge first sees this, of course he is taken aback and frightened, but he puts his sighting down to a piece of undigested beef, I believe. So as I've placed at the top there, when he first meets, and I'm doing air quotes there, you can't see, Marley's ghost in the form of the transformed door knocker, he refuses to believe what he is seeing, and he wants to find very rational, sort of scientific reasoning for his visions. In his instance, that he has consumed something that has upset his digestive system. Okay, and he exclaims, "Humbug," says Scrooge. Okay, remember, humbug is his very infamous exclamative of disbelief or of refusal. Okay, so really at the start of Marley's visitation, Scrooge is highly resistant to his sort of appearance. Now, as I've put on number one there, why do you think then that Dickens goes to reiterate in the novella that Scrooge wasn't prone to flights of fancy? Now, flights of fancy means you're a dreamer, a daydreamer. You are open to sort of spirituality and to the supernatural. Okay, now the limited omniscient narrator reiterates this. They state it quite a few times in different ways with different words, that Scrooge wasn't prone to these sort of visions. He wasn't open-minded. He lived, we know, a very closed off life, okay, keeping to the margins of humanity. And so we keep having that reiteration. Now, what does that show us about Scrooge's character? Well, it shows us once again that he is a man of industry, of the Industrial Revolution, that he is pretty much a caricature of those upper, middle and, upper class individuals that were largely, not always, I really don't want you to use sweeping generalisations to say all of the rich were terrible people. Not true, of course, but there was a lot of class tension. There was a lot of class divide, and Scrooge represents the very worst, I suppose, in that sort of the upper echelons of the hierarchy. Okay, so he represents the very worst. So why have him in disbelief? Well, it represents just how unwilling, how stagnant, those people were. They weren't willing to change, or sort of develop their sort of behaviours to remedy them. So how might this affect the rest of the story and his dealings with the other three ghosts? Well, think about it. If he's resistant at first to the meeting of Marley's ghost, and of course he does eventually meet him, the dreadful apparition, as Dickens creates this image of, Scrooge finally realising that he is this ghost, this dreadful apparition. That's on page 22. He is obviously a man of worldly mind, is Scrooge. He will only believe what he sees. But eventually, when he starts, discussing the situation with Marley and starts to converse with him, we see this tiny little recognition, this small moment. Okay, because Scrooge does, interlock with Marley when he says things like, "Speak comfort to me, Jacob." By the way, Marley's first name's Jacob. And, he asks him questions and he pleads with him. Scrooge notices when he sees Marley's ghost that he is fettered. That's at the top of page 23. Fettered means you're in chains or you're restrained. So he notices things and he does converse with him, he pleads with him, he questions him. So on a very small scale, he begins to at least accept the presence of something before him in that moment. Okay, so what I'm maybe going to predict here, what could be being foreshadowed, is that it's going to take all of the ghosts, it's going to take the series of ghostly visitations to really sort of work away, to chip away at this really resistant persona that we have here. So here's something for you to take note of, please, guys, if you are making notes of this video, which you really should be. And I've summed it up for you here. So Scrooge's refusal to accept Marley's visitation at first is highly telling. It paints him as a man of reason, of science, a product of the Industrial Revolution. After all, think about it for a moment. Light often represents spirituality, right? Okay, to see the light of God. And we know, because the narrator has told us, that Scrooge exists in the dark. Okay, we get this really great quote, "Darkness was cheap and Scrooge liked it." Right, because he's not willing to spend his pennies, his cash, on coal for the fire, but it also is taken as a metaphor, being in the dark, keeping away from others, not knowing their business, okay? He speaks about his solitary life. So he's very much in the dark at the start of the novella, is what I'm saying here, and he needs to welcome in the light. He needs to welcome in the light of God, godly sort of ideas and endeavours, to welcome in hope, spirituality, light and love. Okay, but at the start he's very much in the dark. The movie version does a really great job of painting his where he lives, his house, as this really dark and dingy location, and really Marley's ghost, you can see there, is actually lit up in a way. He's kind of like the only light in that tableau there, in that snapshot from the movie. So he wants to, you know, if you see the light as well, you learn. To see the light means I finally see the light, I know, I get it, knowledge, information. Okay, so that's all what he needs to embrace, all of that. So, some context. Now, I know you did your context hunt, your treasure hunt, and you did some brilliant work over Easter and before on that. So you should have the goods on this, but I just wanted to reiterate a few things. Okay, those images on the right-hand side are really stark. They're from warehouses. At the top, they're chimney sweeps. You know, during the Industrial Revolution, we had extremely sort of unappealing, abhorrent working conditions. The workers there in those factories, look at them taking their lunches. They're placed in lines, aren't they? They look like they are just cogs in a machine, like they're not even given any sense of individuality, any sense of self here. They're just worker bees. Okay, even though those children are smiling in that image, it's just due to their ignorance and their innocence. What happened to them was awful. There were stuffed up chimneys to clean them out when machines could have done the job. Rich households actually preferred the smaller, younger chimney sweeps because they could get right up into the dark recesses and they felt do a better job, even if it meant endangering their lives, and many young sweeps died. Okay, if they didn't become cloistered in the chimney and suffocate, they would suffer, you know, later on down the line, certain health ramifications. A lot of the young boys contracted testicular cancer from their exposure to the soot and the chemicals. It really was a hideous era of the exploitation of the poor and the vulnerable, and we see it in all the generations there, the young and the old. Anyway, so we know that the period of 1760 to 1900 was the Industrial Revolution, a huge expanse of time, right? And, you know, Dickens lived through that. So it went from being this really rural, agricultural economy to being so much more focused on manufacturing and production, right, in the inner cities. Now, that put a lot of strain on so many communities of people, but mainly the lower working classes. Because of this, poverty was rife. Now, Marley and Scrooge were not victims of this Industrial Revolution. In fact, they were some of the perpetrators of the suffering. Okay, as business owners, they were in a privileged position. They saw changes during the Industrial Revolution, but really changes that improved their living situation. Okay, because they gained profit as business owners. It's important to say that Scrooge's way of life, you know, he wasn't actually instantly born into wealth. He was actually working class to begin with, so it actually is shocking that he doesn't have any sympathy for Bob when he, you know, poor old Bob Cratchit, he works for him as a lower working class that he once did as an apprentice, and yet he doesn't pay him properly. Okay, so Marley's ghost then, what is his message? Now, when he arrives, he says something really important. I just want to read it to you now. "I wear the chain I forged in life," replied the ghost. "I made it, link by link and yard by yard. I girded it on my own free will, and of my own free will I wore it. Is its pattern strange to you?" Okay, and he goes on further down and he says, what does he say? "I cannot rest, I cannot stray, I cannot linger anywhere. My spirit never walks beyond our counting house. mark me, listen to me. So his message is quite clear here. Okay, at the start he's saying, I'm now doomed. I wear the chain I forged in life to wear this heavy chain that's fettered, that's restrained to me. And it's made up of, every little link of it, the chain, is made up of all the ills of my life, all the things I did wrong. Okay, and he asks Scrooge, is this pattern strange to you? Don't you recognise this? Because you're forging your own chain right now, and you have been for years, Scrooge. Okay, it's a ponderous chain, it's a long chain, it sprawls. And then he says, of course, when he says I cannot rest, I cannot linger, he's basically saying, I'm stuck here in this place between life and death. I'm stuck in purgatory. I'm stuck here to suffer. This is my punishment. I cannot leave, and I'm doomed to watch all of those people, now I'm dead, that I could have helped when I was alive. I'm doomed to watch the mother with her dying babe in her arms because they're starving or they've contracted diseases from the unsanitary conditions. I'm doomed to watch that because I cannot interrupt what's inevitable for that woman and that baby. I cannot help, and that is punishment. Okay, that is severe punishment. He says it's incessant torture watching that. Okay, it's incessant torture, these 7 years that he has been dead. So we get a really didactic message. You can see the phrase at the top of my slide there. It means a real moral message here in this exchange when he says, and it's in red, mankind was my business. Okay, because Scrooge makes the error of reminding him, well, Marley, you were always a good man of business. Business, cried the ghost. Mankind was my business. The common welfare was my business. Charity, mercy, forbearance, and benevolence were all my business. Okay, so he says, look, I have had 7 years to consider the errors, my misguided judgment, and I now know that humanity was my business. This has given me such Anne in Spectacles vibes, right? Okay, the idea that we're all connected to one another, the idea of collective responsibility. Okay, if we do not learn it, we will learn it in fire and blood and anguish, says the inspector in his prophetic message. This is quite prophetic as well for Scrooge. If he doesn't work to work off these chains, he will suffer the same fate. Okay, you will suffer the same fate. So it's really important. So some questions there for you to consider on the left hand side, but I just want to sum it up right now. Okay, Marley exists in a purgatorial state. He wears those ponderous chains that he forged in life, and each link is representative of a failure, to take care of the most vulnerable, the most needy in society. So let's sum it up. There's that very famous speech there on the right hand side, such a key moment. Why is he important then? In summary, of course you're going to read more and read the whole section with Marley and Scrooge. Marley tells him to expect the ghosts and their visitations, and he says to him, look, you have yet a chance, a hope of escaping my fate. Okay, a chance of hope of my procuring Ebenezer. So he says that I am here to set up your salvation. You have a chance at rebirth here. Okay, so why is his character key? Here we go. He plants the seeds of change for Scrooge, right? He's the first ghost. He plants those seeds. He puts a little bit of water, a bit of fertilizer on that ground, okay, to be one of the catalysts of his change as well. He's the first person that really invites in this opportunity to change. What else does he teach us, the readers, right? Because remember, he's a character, and so it's Dickens using Marley as a mouthpiece. Well, he communicates the consequences, doesn't he, of capitalism, of living a life just fixated on industry and money. This is what happens. Okay, I'm not saying, guys, that if you live this life, when you die, you're going to turn up as a ghost and haunt your best mate or whatever. I'm saying that if we don't find value in our lives, then when we leave this earth, what positive mark have we made? Now, obviously, in his lifetime, he is another representation of the upper class and their apathy. Now, apathy means that you don't do anything. You don't do anything to help, to change, whatever it might be. Okay, so he represents that too. He's Dickens's mouthpiece. He's there to represent Dickens's own views. Mankind was my business. Just like J.B. Priestley, we have this real socialist ethos here. And lastly, what I found really interesting when I think about it is, up until this point, obviously we don't like Scrooge. And we're probably sitting there going, well, I couldn't care less whether he changes, because actually he deserves this fate. He deserves it, okay, for what he's done and what he hasn't done. But through Marley, in his death now, in ghost form, we realise that actually there is hope here for Scrooge to change for the good. And so actually, Marley's ghost invites us, the reader, encourages us to go, okay, I'm listening. I'm going to invest in Scrooge, and I'm going to invest in his change, in his reformation, his transformation. Okay, I really want him, to do good, right? So there's so many layers to Marley's characterization, but I think he is there for those key important reasons. I hope this has been helpful. Once again, if you have any questions, pop them in the comments below. We're always aiming high in X-Band, so we need to make sure that we're getting these notes down, we're looking back over them, we're really understanding them. I do hope you're keeping a key quote log in the back of your books, if you like. It's just a case of whenever I pop the quotes on my slides, the ones that I'm mentioning quite a bit, like mankind was my business, pretty key, so it's worth having, it's worth knowing, worth learning. Okay, have a great day, Year 10. Thank you.